I spent 6 weeks sleeping on a construction site to save my family's $1 million company, while my dad signed every single asset over to my spoiled sister over dinner, right in front of my face. No apology, no hesitation, no single word of gratitude for every late night, every risky client rescue, every sacrifice I'd made for our family's legacy. That cold, cruel dinner moment is burned into my memory forever. The room was warm, lit by soft overhead lights, the table covered in my mom's favorite white linen cloth, the roasted beef on the table still glistened with fresh oil, and the whole house smelled like garlic and baked herbs. It was supposed to be the kind of warm, perfect family night people post about online, but in the middle of that peaceful scene, my father slid a stack of legal papers across the table toward me like they were nothing more than a deck of playing cards. He never looked up at me, never softened his tone, never hesitated for a single second. All he said was, "Your sister deserves this." His index finger tapped the transfer document over and over, each sharp click landing like a nail driven straight into my spine. I stared down at the dense legal text, words I decoded every single day for high-stakes construction and business contracts. I was trained to parse fine print, loopholes, and asset transfers for a living, but in that moment, my brain shut down entirely. All those professional skills vanished, and the words blurred into meaningless symbols, like I'd never learned how to read at all. In that frozen second, years of buried memories crashed over me all at once, sharp and unfiltered. I saw myself waking at 4 a.m., day after day, driving out to muddy, freezing construction sites to inspect steel reinforcement bars, and sign off on inspection reports. I remembered driving 3 hours through torrential rain just to calm down furious clients who were weeks behind on project timelines. I recalled sleeping on a thin folding office bed for 6 straight weeks, skipping meals and burning myself out to rescue our family's failing medical center construction project, while I was bleeding myself dry to keep our family business afloat. My younger sister Brooke was halfway across the world, posting sun-soaked vacation photos from the Bahamas, living a completely carefree life with zero responsibilities. My father spoke about handing over my hard-earned position, my company vehicle, and my year-end bonus to Brooke with the exact dull, routine tone he used to ask his assistant to order office supplies. It was pure, unfeeling bureaucracy, no gratitude, no guilt, no recognition of what I'd sacrificed. My mom sat directly across from me, her eyes fixed rigidly on the embroidered napkin in her hands. She refused to lift her gaze, refused to acknowledge the breaking tension in the room, like if she stared hard enough at the tiny stitching, she could erase the entire conversation and pretend none of this was happening. And Brooke? She sat right there at the table, wearing a lazy, satisfied smile. It wasn't even a cruel or malicious grin, it was the quiet, unquestioning contentment of a spoiled child, who just got handed a new toy she never worked for. She had never once wondered where the money, the opportunities, or the luxury came from. She only ever knew how to reach out and take it. I walked out of that house that night and caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I expected to see tears, red, rimmed eyes, a face twisted with anger or grief, but what I saw was terrifyingly calm. It was the stillness right in the center of a violent storm, empty and hollow. I went back to my empty apartment, turned off every light, and sat motionless on the floor, all night long. I watched streetlights filter through the window, casting swaying tree shadows across my ceiling, and I finally understood the brutal truth I'd spent my whole life avoiding. All the years I'd spent grinding, proving myself, and begging for my family's validation had been pointless from the start. This was never a fair competition. It was a script written long before I was born. I was cast as the permanent background character, the reliable, uncomplaining worker who kept everything running. While Brooke was the beloved lead. No matter how hard I practiced my lines, how perfectly I executed every task, how much I sacrificed, my name would never appear on the final page of the story. This unfair dynamic didn't start with that dinner. It's a toxic pattern rooted deep in our childhood, a broken family system that shaped every part of how we grew up, a common psychological cycle in households with golden child and scapegoat dynamics. From the time I was old enough to understand responsibility, I was taught that my purpose was to protect, accommodate, and take the fall for my sister. When I was 7 and Brooke was 5, she knocked an entire bottle of red ink onto our cream living room carpet. Before she could even blink, my mom burst into the room and immediately blamed me. "Megan, why didn't you watch your sister?" That was the first time I realized the unspoken rule of our family. Brooke's mistakes were always external accidents, and my existence was permanently responsible for fixing them. As we grew older, that unwritten rule only hardened into an unbreakable routine. Every single misstep Brooke made was excused, rationalized, and softened by our parents. Her bad grades were the teacher's fault, her failed jobs were toxic work environments, her poor choices were bad influences from friends. But any struggle I faced was automatically my own burden to bear. I had to solve my own problems, manage my own stress, and never complain, because I was the mature, responsible one. In high school, I pulled straight A's semester after semester, sacrificing social events and sleep to maintain perfect grades. My dad would glance at my report card and give a single, dismissive nod, muttering, "That's what you're supposed to do," like my hard work was nothing but an obligation. Meanwhile, Brooke brought home C's and D's regularly, and my mom would bake her favorite chocolate chip cookies, shower her with praise, and tell her grades didn't matter, as long as she was happy. When it came time for college, I chose a grueling double major in business administration and construction management. I picked those difficult fields on purpose, determined to learn every single detail of our family's construction business, to understand every process, every cost, every operational nuance, so I could one day lead and expand the company. Brooke chose communications simply because it sounded fun and easy. Every single one of her half-baked business attempts flopped miserably. She opened a boutique that folded in months, launched an online magazine no one read, and invested in a restaurant venture that crashed and burned instantly. Yet our parents bailed her out every single time, wiping her losses clean with company money, never once making her face the consequences of her reckless decisions. Once we both joined the family business, the hidden favoritism turned into blatant, unapologetic injustice. I worked as an entry-level estimator, earning a starting salary, while running myself ragged between dusty, chaotic construction sites and piles of endless spreadsheets and project reports. I worked overtime every week, fixed client disputes, streamlined messy workflows, and rescued delayed projects. Brooke walked straight into a vice president position with zero relevant experience, handed a brand new luxury company SUV, and a spacious corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. Her job required no real labor, no problem-solving, no technical expertise. She spent her days attending fancy industry luncheons, posting curated company content on social media, and holding empty, agenda-less meetings just to look busy for our parents. I spent years telling myself to stay patient, that consistent results would eventually speak for themselves. But every time I saved a failing project, secured a high-value client, or optimized a broken company process, my hard work was erased and rebranded as team effort, or company platform success. The praise, promotions, raises, and industry recognition always went straight to Brooke, under the excuse that she needed to build leadership credibility, as the supposed future heir of the company. The most gut-wrenching irony of all came during the medical center project, my most critical, high-stakes work to date. Brooke made a catastrophic technical error that nearly tanked the entire multi-million-dollar build, putting the whole project at risk of default and ruining our company's industry reputation. I moved onto the construction site for 6 weeks straight, working dawn till dusk to fix her mistakes, redo faulty calculations, reorganize chaotic workflows, and get the project back on track. But on the official ribbon-cutting day, my dad pulled Brooke front and center for every camera and every industry guest. He proudly introduced her as his successor, the talented leader who'd saved the project. I stood invisible in the crowd, still clutching the corrected inspection reports and revised blueprints that proved every hour of my unrecognized labor. That day, I understood the cruelest truth of my life. My value to my family was never as a daughter, or a leader, or a hard worker. I was just a functional tool, a permanent fixer for every problem my sister created. People never thank the plumber for fixing a leaky pipe. They just keep using the water and forget the pipe ever broke. My reliability, my resilience, my endless willingness to clean up everyone else's messes was exactly why I was never seen, never celebrated, never loved equally. After that devastating dinner, I left Boston entirely and relocated to Chicago. My first week in my new sparse, white-walled apartment was the darkest period of my life. I woke up every single morning feeling numb, like I was just a hollow body going through the motions of living. I told my coworkers I was chasing new career opportunities, told my friends I wanted a fresh start in a new market. I even tried to lie to myself that this was just a normal professional transition, that I wasn't running from a family who'd completely discarded me. But every night, behind my closed apartment door, the memories played on a loop in my head. My father's cold fingers tapping that legal document, Brooke's effortless smile, my mother's silent cowardice. I broke down in the shower every night, letting the hot water drown my quiet sobs, so no one could hear me falling apart. I wrote dozens of unsent emails addressed to my dad, filled with anger, desperate questions, broken pleas, and raw grief, only to delete every single one, erasing those vulnerable words like I erased the version of myself that spent decades begging for their love. On the 15th morning after I left, sunlight slanted between the city brick buildings and landed across my laptop keyboard, and something finally shifted inside me. I realized I could not spend the rest of my life trapped in that dinner chair, defining my entire identity by how my family abandoned me. I stopped being the forgotten, unvalued daughter of the Patterson family. I built something entirely mine. I registered Patterson Strategic Group under my own last name, not to carry on my family's legacy, but to reclaim and redefine a name they'd tainted with unfairness and favoritism. If they were going to say the Patterson name belonged only to Brooke and her unearned privilege, I would make that name mean something real in Chicago's construction and business industry. The beginning was brutal. The industry was cold, male-dominated, and unwelcoming. I showed up to every industry breakfast event in my sharpest professional suit, holding a coffee cup, hovering on the edges of male-dominated business circles. The other professionals looked right through me, assuming I was someone's assistant, dismissing me as a small-time consultant with no real clout or family backing. No one wanted to work with me. No one wanted to take a chance on a woman who'd walked away from her family's established company. My very first client was a desperate developer whose project was on the brink of total collapse, bleeding money and falling apart at every seam. I charged him the lowest possible rate, with a single condition: if I turned the entire project around and stabilized his business, he would pay me a performance bonus. For 6 weeks, I practically lived on that chaotic construction site. I untangled the messy, disorganized timelines the previous incompetent manager had left behind. I removed 2 subcontractors who'd been fraudulently inflating material costs and scamming the project. I implemented a simple foolproof daily work tracking system that eliminated delays, miscommunication, and lazy workflow gaps. When the project finally stabilized and got back on schedule, the developer looked me in the eyes and told me I'd delivered more results alone than his entire former team combined. That single sentence meant more to me than every dismissive nod and half-hearted compliment my father had ever given me in 32 years. By the end of that year, I had a small but thriving office, 2 dedicated full-time assistants, 3 long-term high-value client contracts, and a feeling I'd never known before: pure, unshakable ownership. Every win, every profit, every positive review was entirely mine. No one could steal my credit. No one could reassign my success to a more favored family member. No one could dismiss my achievements as luck. I'd built every single piece of my new life with my own 2 hands. Brick by brick. Back in Boston, my family's company slowly rotted from the inside out, the damage seeping quietly at first before exploding into full collapse. Former coworkers texted me about worsening company culture, about Brooke purging the entire senior accounting team, and replacing experienced professionals with unqualified friends, who couldn't even read basic construction cost spreadsheets. Industry rumors spread fast. Patterson Construction was signing deals at impossibly low prices, cutting every corner to compete. Bleeding cash faster than they could bring it in. Brooke's first major destructive move was eliminating the sustainable building department. I'd spent 3 full years building from scratch. That division was our company's most profitable, reliable revenue stream, drawing premium, paying clients who valued green building certifications and sustainable construction practices. It employed nearly a quarter of our full-time engineers, and kept the business stable through slow market seasons. But Brooke shut it down overnight, claiming the certification process slowed down her creative vision, and calling the profitable department unnecessary bloat. In its place, she poured company money into empty, vanity-driven brand projects. She hired expensive external designers to rework the company logo, filmed a flashy corporate commercial that cost enough to cover 2 months of full-site construction wages, and launched a pretentious podcast about female leadership in construction. The irony was unbearable. She preached breaking industry glass ceilings while occupying her executive position solely through nepotism, with 0 tangible skills or achievements to her name. She staffed every senior management role with her wealthy social circle, people with polished resumes and designer suits, who had never spent a day on a construction site, who couldn't calculate concrete curing times, who had no idea how to resolve on-site safety disputes or labor conflicts. Our experienced, hard-working project managers quit one by one, burned out by her incompetence and endless poor decisions. Without skilled leadership, Brooke began underbidding every project, just to steal market share, foolishly treating construction like a tech startup, where strategic losses could buy growth. She had no understanding of how physical construction worked. Every underpriced contract created immediate, irreversible losses. She began robbing funds from completed project payments to cover material costs for new builds, creating a collapsing house of cards with the company's cash flow. Within months, suppliers demanded full upfront cash payments, a terrifying red flag in construction, signaling the end of decades of trusted business credit. Longtime subcontractors walked away entirely, not just over unpaid wages, but over the total lack of respect and reliable professionalism Brooke brought to every deal. She even began delaying employee paychecks, breaking the most basic promise of any business leader. I knew the collapse was inevitable, but my heart still dropped when I received my dad's frantic text, saying their family mortgage was overdue. The house they'd bragged about for decades, the symbol of their family's stable legacy, was moments from foreclosure. Even in the middle of this catastrophic failure, Brooke was unreachable, posting vacation photos from a Miami resort, and messaging me casually to say I needed to relax more. She still saw the entire collapsing business as a trivial game, never once understanding that every reckless choice had real, devastating consequences for dozens of employees, suppliers, and our family's future. She'd spent her entire life protected from every negative outcome, so she had no idea how to face failure or accountability. Then came the phone call I'd both been waiting for and dreading, my dad's voice shaky and defeated, saying 6 simple words, "I need you to come back." I stood at my Chicago office floor, to ceiling window, watching the sunset reflect off the river water, and felt no rush to save them. 2 years earlier, I would have dropped everything instantly. I would have booked the next flight to Boston, gathered every solution I'd ever learned, worked 24-hour days to fix all their messes, then quietly stepped back into my invisible, unappreciated role once everything was stable again. But that dinner night had rewired every part of me. I could now clearly see the difference between obligation and exploitation. I owed my family nothing. They owed me years of overdue respect, gratitude, and fairness they would never give. I didn't answer his call right away. I made them wait 3 full days. Every pleading text from my mom, every desperate missed call from Brooke, only strengthened my resolve. I was no longer the family's emergency rescue service. When I finally responded, I laid out 7 non-negotiable conditions for my return. I demanded 51% company ownership, and full operational control. I required Brooke's immediate termination from all administrative roles, with 0 access to company finances or client contracts. I ordered my parents to step back into purely advisory roles with no voting power or decision-making authority. I claimed full independent rights to hire, fire, and restructure the entire company, with final approval over every single major business choice. If they refused any single term, I told them I would never speak to them again, for the rest of my life. I sent the terms to my lawyer for official documentation without a single trembling finger. This was no longer a family argument. This was a critical business restructuring, and I was the only person capable of saving their failing company. My dad pushed back, calling my terms unreasonable, clinging to his old authoritative tone. I told him plainly, letting an unqualified, untrained child inherit an entire company while punishing your hardest working daughter is the only unreasonable thing that's ever happened here. I'm just fixing your mistake. The line went dead silent. I could hear the sound of his shattered pride crumbling through the phone. Brooke messaged me angrily, claiming I was stealing her birthright. I replied simply, "You can't steal something you already lost," then blocked her entirely. I know many people will call me cold, will say blood is thicker than water, will insist family should always come first. But family ties should never be a tool for endless one-sided exploitation. Love and loyalty only work both ways. I wasn't punishing them, I was offering a fair, equal contract. They could choose to accept my terms and save everything they'd built, or refuse and face total ruin. Either way, I was done being their free. Endless lifeline. I flew back to Boston and went straight to the company office. No detour home, no emotional family reunion, no fake reconciliation. The once pristine executive office was a chaotic mess. Unsigning contracts littered every desk surface, dead potted plants sat wilted by the windows, and the whiteboard was covered in meaningless, pretentious leadership buzzwords from Brooke's overpriced business coach. I spent my entire afternoon sorting through corrupted, disorganized bank records, untangling the jumbled financial data Brooke had destroyed with her careless system overhauls. The next morning, I held an all-staff meeting on the warehouse floor, surrounded by our hard-working construction crew and office staff. No fancy stage, no microphone, no formal podium. I stood on an old wooden table, so every single person could see my face and hear my unfiltered words. I told them the unvarnished truth no one had ever dared to speak aloud. I told them delayed wages were not bad market luck, but catastrophic leadership failure. I told them lost client partnerships were not industry competition, but reckless poor judgment. I told them supplier walkouts were not bad business timing, but total corporate credit collapse. Every word I spoke was backed by hard financial data, project records, and months of verifiable proof. I called Brooke forward in front of every single employee, every worker who'd dealt with delayed checks, every manager who'd cleaned up her mistakes, every staff member who'd suffered through her terrible leadership. I handed her a printed copy of her official leadership failure report, and told her to read it out loud. Her hands shook visibly, as she stood before the entire team. Her eyes darted to mine, begging for me to save her, to step in and take the fall just like I'd done 100 times when we were kids. But I stood completely still, no sympathy, no intervention. I let every single person watch her break down mid-sentence, her voice cracking as she admitted she'd approved high-stakes contracts far beyond her limited expertise, wasted company funds on useless vanity projects, and mismanaged every critical part of the business. The room was completely silent. No cheers, no boos, no whispers. That heavy, collective silence was far more powerful than any public humiliation. Every employee in that room had suffered the direct consequences of her incompetence, and they were finally hearing the full truth. After that day, I moved her out of her luxury corner office and into a standard cubicle right next to the accounting team. She was surrounded by staff who tracked every dollar, every expense, every payment she'd once recklessly mishandled. People asked if I was being cruel. I told them cruelty was letting unqualified people sit in power while hard-working people suffered. What I did was give her honest reality, a chance to see exactly how the business actually functioned, to understand the real work she'd never appreciated, and to earn her place like everyone else instead of stealing it through privilege. Fixing the company's financial collapse turned out to be far easier than repairing my broken family dynamic. These people are still my parents, still my sister, but every old bond is permanently fractured. The trust, the blind loyalty, the unconditional willingness to sacrifice myself for them is gone forever, replaced with clear, unbreakable boundaries I will never compromise on. I refused to move back to Boston. I knew if I resettled in the same city, I'd slowly be pulled back into our toxic family pattern. I'd fall back into the role of the peacekeeper, the fixer, the selfless daughter who prioritizes everyone else's comfort over her own healing. Instead, I hired a strong, experienced general manager to handle daily company operations in Boston, someone unafraid to stand up to family interference and enforce professional standards. I fly to Boston once a month to review financial reports, attend board meetings, and oversee major strategic decisions. The rest of my time, I stay rooted in Chicago, focused on growing my own independent consulting firm. My primary identity is no longer the family savior. I am first and foremost the founder and leader of my own successful business. I establish strict non-negotiable rules for every family member. Brooke can only contact me via formal work email, with strictly professional content. Any attempt at emotional manipulation, guilt, tripping, or personal conversation is automatically ignored. My mom gets one scheduled 30-minute phone call per week. If she tries to guilt me about Brooke's unhappiness or my dad's stress, I end the call immediately with no explanation. My father can only reach me through official business channels. No more late-night emergency personal texts to manipulate my empathy. I don't argue, I don't negotiate, I don't justify my choices to them anymore. At first, they all constantly tested my boundaries. My mom would slip in passive, aggressive comments about Brooke's suffering mid-call. My dad sent a handwritten letter begging for forgiveness and understanding, but I held firm every single time. I didn't need to be cruel, I just needed to be consistent. I let them learn through repetition that their old manipulation tactics would no longer work on me. It took me 32 years to learn how to say no to strangers and professional partners, but only 3 months to learn how to say no to my family. The hardest lesson wasn't setting rules, it was accepting that my emotional energy, my time, and my peace are my own valuable property, and no one gets unlimited access to them simply because we share blood. 1 year after the full restructuring, Patterson Construction released its first profitable quarterly report in years. The numbers weren't flashy or extravagant, but they were clean, honest, and sustainable. No emergency loans, no budget loopholes, no last-minute financial fixes, just pure, earned profit from well-managed projects and restored client trust. I sat in my Chicago office, staring at the report, watching tourist boats glide across the river outside my window, and I felt no rush of triumph or revenge. I felt only quiet, steady balance. After a lifetime of leaning forward, straining, fighting to prove my worth, I was finally standing straight on my own 2 feet, no longer leaning on anyone else's approval to validate my existence. My dad finally sent me a genuine humbled message. He said he now understood the truth. Brooke didn't lose her legacy because she was unworthy, but because I never deserved to be overlooked, underappreciated, and discarded for her benefit. It was a late, reluctant realization forced on him by total business collapse, not genuine parental remorse. I replied plainly that this was never about Brooke's losses or gains. This was about me finally stopping my family from taking endless pieces of me without ever giving anything back. I never destroyed Brooke's life. She still has a stable job, a home, and the chance to build a genuine future for herself. All I did was take away her free pass to endless privilege, her lifelong ability to avoid consequences. She now has to work for every opportunity, just like every ordinary person. That feels like punishment to her only because she spent her entire life shielded from basic reality. I never ruined my parents' lives either. They live comfortably in a modest home, simply without the extravagant wealth and status they once took for granted. Their pain comes from losing the fake superiority they built their lives around, not from any harm I inflicted. I gained far more than business success through this journey. I gained inner wholeness. I no longer wait for anyone to choose me, validate me, or recognize my worth. I no longer tie my value to my family's broken judgment. I choose myself now. I choose a gentle, intentional forgiveness, not the fake kind that erases trauma, but the mature kind that lets go of pain without excusing harm. I choose a new adult relationship with my family, built on boundaries and respect, instead of obligation and sacrifice. I choose to redefine my last name as a symbol of hard work, resilience, and self-made success, not nepotism and favoritism. I've spent my whole life building foundations for other people. Now I finally stand on ground I paved entirely by myself. I wonder how many of you are still stuck in that same old cycle, endlessly working to earn love and approval from family members who will never value you the way you deserve. How many of you have spent years cleaning up other people's messes, only to be pushed aside when it's time for rewards and recognition? What would change in your life if you finally stopped begging to be chosen, and started choosing yourself first? If you've ever dealt with toxic family favoritism, invisible labor, or being the unappreciated, responsible one in your household, I want to hear your story. Drop your experience in the comments below. This community thrives on real, honest stories no one talks about. If you relate to this journey of healing, boundary setting, and self-reclamation, make sure to like and follow me for more raw, unfiltered true stories about breaking toxic cycles and rebuilding your life from the ground up.